In pursuit of the perfect record, some artists and producers are willing to go that extra mile. Be it lighting fires indoors or threatening musicians at gunpoint, there are certainly some real-life unorthodox methods out there which have been used in order to capture that unique sound or just to get your talent into the zone. So today, we're going to be listing 5 strange stories from the studio. On Heroes by David Bowie, there's that noticeable guitar part crying in the background. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't produced using an EBow, which would have been much simpler. Rather, it was produced using layers of guitar feedback. With his guitar plugged in and the volume cranked up on the speakers, Robert Fripp would walk around a room and encourage the noise. Once it started ringing out, he'd make a mark on the floor to know that this spot in the room resonated with an A note, and that this one was an F sharp. And it produced such a dreamy and interesting atmosphere when it was layered together, they chucked it onto the record you hear now. So if you've ever picked up a guitar and gone, I'd like to play this without actually playing this, well, now you know how to do that. Phil Spector wasn't always a trigger-happy, wig-wearing convicted murderer. He was also a gun-toting, hair-raising, celebrated producer. Not only did he revolutionize music with his famous wall of sound, but he also terrorized musicians with his famous wall of intimidation.
I just went, boom!
Yes, sir, Spector would carry a gun on him at all times and reportedly pulled it out on various occasions. Leonard Cohen had a gun pointed at him by a drunk Phil Spector. Debbie Harry of Blondie had a gun pointed at her by a sober Phil Spector. The Ramones were threatened by Spector for trying to leave the recording studio. Ronnie Spector, Spector's ex-wife, was literally held prisoner by him during their marriage. And John Lennon was not only chased around the studio by crazy old Phil and his gun, but also had the gun fired inches from his ear. To which Lennon replied, "Phil, if you're going to kill me, but don't fuck with my ears, I need them." Fire, or Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, was an instrumental recording from the Beach Boys mastermind Brian Wilson during their abandoned Smile sessions way back in 1966. Among other reasons, this recording was abandoned because Wilson and his best friend at the time, LSD, were convinced that the track Fire possessed magical powers which caused a building across the street from their studio to burn down following their recording session. True story. Anyway, what made the actual session a bit out of the ordinary was the fact that Wilson requested everyone present to wear fireman helmets whilst he lit an actual fire in studio. Fortunately, it was only a small fire in a bucket and not something greater, because what is OH&S anyway? But yeah, Wilson wanted everyone to smell the literal fire while recording some figurative fire in the studio. Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads is such a groovy track. It's essentially comprised of independent rhythmic and musical loops which are continuously swirling around each other over a 2-bar beat. What's interesting about it is that producer Brian Eno recorded each of the band members for separate overdubs where they improvised whatever the hell they wanted to throw on top. But the only catch was that they weren't allowed to hear what the other members had recorded. So ultimately they ended up with these really cool singular cells of music that Eno would then fade in and out of at various times during the arrangement. The finished product was a constantly changing loop of music, ebbing and flowing beneath the unmistakable top line of David Byrne's voice. When the Beatles recorded the massive orchestral build heard in A Day in the Life, they dressed the orchestra up in ridiculous costumes. This helped get the stiff players into the same avant-garde mindset as the band themselves. Initially, they had a hard time conveying their ideas to the orchestra because classically trained musicians typically don't stray from the written work they're given. So, producer George Martin's attempt to notate their breakdown was to mark their lowest note and their highest note, and then he drew a squiggly line from point A to B so that they had some form of trajectory during all the madness. They were also told not to listen to what each other was playing, which was another difficult thing to do for a classically trained orchestra. And on top of their fancy formal wear, they'd be wearing various costume pieces such as fake nipples, clown noses, upside-down glasses, funny hats, gorilla hands, and balloons on the ends of their instruments. It was fun, it was zany, heck, the Rolling Stones were in attendance at the session, so it was all kinds of awesome. And those were 5 strange stories from the studio. Of course, there are many other random tales featuring mad methods out there, so comment below if you know of any and we might cover them in a future vid. Until then, I've been Michael for the Culture Kids on Tone Deaf. Bye.